My name is Lucan Wei. I am the co-director of the Petro-Yatsik program for the study of Ukraine, and welcome to this panel. So when the war began, Putin claimed that the invasion was about his concern over NATO expansion and in general threats from the West. I don't necessarily believe that was the case, but to the extent that it was, he got quite the opposite. His invasion has motivated dramatic increases in defense spending across the Western world, and in Denmark recently they voted to take part in EU security policy to an extent they have not in the past. And of course, most remarkably, we have the decision by both Finland and Sweden to join NATO. So here to discuss the shift in Swedish and Finnish relations to Europe and Russia, we have three experts. First, from Helsinki, we have Professor Vladimir Gelman, who's known to many of you as an expert in Russian politics. He's an author of many books, including Authoritarian Russia, Analyzing Post-Soviet Regime Change with the University of Pittsburgh Press, a very fine book. Authoritarian Modernization in Russia, Ideas, Institutions, and Policies. And most excitingly, he's coming out with a book in a few months with University of Michigan Press entitled The Politics of Bad Governance in Contemporary Russia. Next, also from Finland, we have Arkady Moshes, who's the program director of the EU Eastern European Neighborhood and Research Program. He's been a fellow at numerous Western institutions, Chatham House, the Danish Institute for International Affairs, the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at George Washington University, Woodrow Wilson, you name it. He also, most recently has published what will almost certainly be a fascinating article on Zelensky, President Zelensky's changing approach towards Russia that is published through his institute. And we're going to try to get a link to that paper, since I'm sure it'll be of interest to many of you. So I think to begin the discussion, and finally we have Ambassador Fredrik Löjdquist, who's the director of the Stockholm Centre for Eastern European Studies, an independent institute constituted and financed by the Swedish government. He is also a former Swedish diplomat with previous missions, such as the envoy and ambassador for the Swedish Presidency of the EU in Georgia in 2009, right after another invasion, ambassador to the OSCE, and most recently, Sweden's first ambassador and special envoy for hybrid threats based in Stockholm in 2018 to 2021. He also, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Ambassador, participated in a working group to deliberate on the changed security environment following Russia's aggression towards Ukraine. This was a Swedish government working group. So maybe I'll just begin by sort of getting some background from Fredrik Löjdquist and Arkady Moshes on sort of what was sort of Sweden and Finland's role in Europe, during the Cold War, before the February invasion. What was its relationship to Russia? Maybe start with you, Ambassador Löjdquist.
Thank you. That's quite some question during the Cold War. But maybe to start, Sweden has a long-standing tradition of neutrality or armed neutrality, which goes back to the beginning of the 19th century, since 1814. And this was also our policies during the First and Second World War. After the end of the Second World War, there was discussions on having a Nordic defense union, but as Denmark and Norway joined NATO, the decision was made then to remain neutral, but an armed neutrality, that we would be able to defend ourselves. And one of the arguments for this was also that Sweden joining the NATO in the end of 40s or beginning of 50s would have put Finland in a very difficult position, and also that Finland might have been sort of more included in the Soviet sphere of influence, so to say, and we would have the sort of the Iron Curtain between Finland and Sweden. So we wanted to avoid that. This was coupled with significant defense spending and a strong Swedish independent defense. But that was always coupled, not totally open to the public during the Cold War, with a strong cooperation, especially with the US, but also the UK and NATO. In the beginning of the 90s, after the end of the Cold War, we also, with them together with Finland, joined the EU, and we changed our own description to not being any more neutral. And neutral in the Swedish interpretation, you could anyway only be in case of a war in the vicinity. So we were military non-aligned, and that was the sort of the new headline or etiquette for Swedish position. Of course, even this was not outspoken. The Swedish defense was, of course, dimensioned and geared towards a possible Soviet invasion and so forth. There was significant cuts in the Swedish defense, especially end of 90s and the beginning in 2000, and we abolished the conscript system of conscripts, for instance. There has been always, I would say, in Sweden, a threat perception that Russia is a potential threat, and this has increased partly after 2008 and Russia's aggression against Georgia, but particularly after 2014. And there was a new defense bill with some then significant spending increases, and also going back to territorial defense. If we then jump forward, but still the understanding was then that we still remained military non-aligned, and there was, but after 2014, to deal with the new sort of potential Russian threat, and the Swedish government then concluded that an armed aggression from Russia could not be excluded. We developed a closer relationship to the NATO in terms of enhanced opportunities partnership in close cooperation to Finland, and also bilateral and plurilateral arrangements with the US, in Northern Europe, and with Finland. And in later years, the Finnish military defense cooperation became more far-reaching than we've ever had with anything before. But until there was a government declaration end of last year and a declaration of foreign policy in February this year, where the government still proclaimed that Sweden would remain military non-aligned.
Okay.
So just to finish up, to seeing the developments of after February 24th, and also the movement in Finland, Sweden very rapidly, I would say during sort of April and first half of May, then turned 180 degrees turn in Swedish security policy. And this is a major shift. And then together with Finland, we announced, the Swedish government on May 16th announced that our intention to join NATO.
Yeah, we'll certainly discuss that at great length. I'm going to now turn to you, Arkady. Unfortunately, Finland is probably known to many people for the term Finlandization. Can you just, obviously give a kind of brief overview of a very big topic of Finland's relationship to Europe and Russia? Obviously, Finland was invaded by the Soviet Union in the run-up to World War II. Can you sort of characterize that relationship in the last 50 or so years?
Yes, thank you very much. But before I do that, I think I need to say something else also. Because when we are talking about the topic of Russia's war in Ukraine, we should understand that for Finland, it is not only about Finland's own NATO membership. It's actually almost as much about actual solidarity with Ukraine. And in order to understand that, we need to go 100 years back, and I'll try to do it very quickly. And I'll do something which I haven't been doing since my high school, namely to start my presentation with reciting a piece of poetry written by a classic of Finnish literature, Eino Leino, in June 1917. It's a pretty big piece, which is entitled "Hail to Ukraine." I'll only read 4 lines. Bold be Ukraine, for you now must not waver. Dawn of your people, it surely has come. Calmly and firmly in danger be braver. Blaze if you must to your liberty's drum. So the essence of this piece of poetry is actually about the view of Ukraine, which existed at that time, at least among the part of the Finnish population, that Ukraine would be the leader of all those peoples that were suffering under the Tsarist yoke on their way to freedom. I will not be saying that, okay, that's the piece of poetry that everything knows. Of course not. But it didn't take long in February for this piece to reappear. And if you quickly go through, you will find lots of these points which are important for the Finns. There was a diplomatic relationship between the newly born Finland and the newly born Ukraine, established, if I'm not mistaken, in January 1918. Of course, there are very strong and sometimes painful parallels with what you've mentioned, the Soviet invasion of Finland in 1939 and the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And especially the beginning of the war, the first months, the ineffectiveness and inefficiency of the Soviet and Russian army was an interesting point of discussion. But then, of course, the main point is that Finland had to fight alone. It was promised help in 1939 and didn't receive it. So for the Finns, it's essential that Ukrainians would not repeat the fate of Finland of 1939 and would not end up this war losing territories. Again, not many people know, but Finland actually was denazified. And the request of denazification was made by the Soviet Union in 1944. And that was the first kind of nation in Europe to be so-called denazified. And the Allied Control Commission pursued this policy quite meticulously, I would say, for a couple of years, helped by the local communists, by the way. But now we are getting closer to our time, and this is the answer to your actual question. What I'm trying to say is the solidarity with Ukraine is deeply rooted, and very strong instinctive understanding of the predicament in which Ukraine currently is here. The next point which brings Ukraine and Finland closer is actually the rejection of Finlandization. Because while many, especially in Europe, but also partly in the United States, were praising Finlandization of a certain type of policy, which kind of allowed Finland to live in peace with both the Soviet Union and the West, Finns do not see it that way. And when somebody is praising Finlandization, Finns actually feel very deeply offended, because this was not a policy that they chose. That was a policy which was imposed on them as a country.
I'm sorry, can you just briefly describe, for those of us who may not know, just briefly summarize exactly what that meant in actual terms?
Yeah, that's a trade of foreign policy sovereignty for the right to keep democracy inside in the most brief way. That Finland had the right, according to the treaties that it signed with the Soviet Union, to continue live as an electoral democracy inside, but it was deprived of the right to take certain foreign policy decisions, including the right to join military alliances. So basically, it took Finland 25 years before it was allowed by the Soviet Union to join a trade club, the European Free Trade Association, in the beginning of 1970s. So all the talks which were going around Europe in the last 20 years, that this is what Ukraine should choose, were absolutely unacceptable, offending, and unhelpful from the Finnish point of view. But if we go closer to the NATO issue as such and talk about the Finnish security policy before February, it was essentially based on 4 points. And point number of 4 pillars. And the pillar number 1 was credible independent defense. And Finland, unlike Sweden and unlike many other European countries, has been taking the issue of defense, of national defense, very seriously throughout. There is a conscription-based army. I mean, the standing army is more or less professional and it's not large, but the reserves are large. The system of civil protection, civil defense is quite strong. I mean, I will give you an example that every first Monday of every month, we hear sirens of the air attack. They're tested every month, and that's been going on for decades, regardless of the relationship with Russia or whoever. Every block of flats built up until now in a mandatory way has bomb shelter. Our cellars are bomb shelters, which can be converted into, with filters, with water, with electricity supplies. They can be converted into bomb shelters within hours. Now I keep my bicycle there, but I mean, it's not what it's intended to be. So Finns has been taking its national defense seriously. Its pillar number 2 was United Nations. Finland, more than some other countries, praised and hoped for the role of the United Nations as a security provider. Number 3 was the European Union. And of course, this is why it was totally wrong to call Finland a neutral country. Finland was not a neutral country. It was a militarily non-allied country, but it was part of the security cooperation of the European Union. Interestingly enough, when Finland was joining the European Union in the mid-90s, the membership in the EU was seen as a sufficient security guarantee. So it was not only a potential reaction of Russia that affected Finland's view, but it was a genuine belief that it would be enough to have a seat at that table to feel safely. And of course, it was supposed to work because the Finnish EU decisions were taken in 94-95. And that was the time when the NATO enlargement debate in Europe was already going on. And actually, Russia was sending messages to Central European countries that what they should do is to join the EU and not join NATO. So not that it was like discussed in that way in Finland, but what was done, it was actually exactly what Russia suggested the other countries to do. And only the final 4th pillar was indeed a kind of a special relationship with the Russian Federation, Soviet Union before. There was no sense of an imminent looming conflict, let alone armed conflict with Russia in this country, unlike, for instance, in the Baltic states, because in the Baltic states, they always knew there would be a conflict one day. Finland didn't live in that paradigm at all. I mean, there were different type of people, but nobody saw that conflict as inevitable.
So
nevertheless,
even with the, sorry for interrupting, even though there would be a history of invasion, I mean, that's interesting.
Even though there was a history of invasion, but there were lots of people who believed that the world has changed. That kind of the European Union experience, the experience of living in on a peaceful continent, that would work. There was, well, I wouldn't say euphoria, but something very close to the feeling of euphoria, which you could even see probably before the Georgia war and before the economic crisis of 2008. There was a belief that Russia would become a normal country, a source of prosperity for some Finnish industries, and not really a threat. A problem, yes, maybe yes, big state, difficult historical relationship, but there was no willingness to like base its security policy on history, if I may say so. That started to change in 2008, but didn't change back then because the Russian-Georgian war was too short in that sense. And because the European Union took the decisions that it took, basically to turn the page and to reset the relations with Russia. But 2014 was different. Since 2014, Finland has been preparing for all sorts of emergencies. Unexpectedly for many, Finland stayed in the group of countries to which Germany belonged, and not the one to which Italy, Austria, Hungary, and other Russia friends belonged. Finland, it took it a little bit to give its word in favor of sanctions, but after it did so, it has never shown any hesitation to stick to that position. Again, unlike many European countries, unexpectedly for many. And that was the period of time that the defense and security cooperation with NATO allies intensified enormously, both as NATO as an alliance and individually NATO countries. And that culminated in a decision taken in December last year to purchase US planes, which for Finland is a colossal investment. We're talking about dozens of billions of dollars. and an equipment which will serve the Finnish defense for the next maybe 50 years. And the Finnish decision is one part of the equation here. But the fact that the United States agreed to provide Finland with this absolutely modern equipment also tells you tons about the level of mutual trust between Finland and the US, and more generally between Finland and NATO. So this, what was there before, we were probably moving closer to NATO in terms of cooperation, but certainly not towards the membership. For decades, the number of supporters of the NATO membership in Finland was between 20 and 25%. And the number of opponents prevailed. And then everything started to change in December when Russia put forward this ultimatum. And of course, most in Europe thought that this ultimatum that NATO should not enlarge was targeted specifically on Ukraine, especially the Germans thought so. But Finns perceived that it was targeted at them as well. Again, this is where you go back to the historical parallels. Because the ultimatum was about non-enlargement of NATO eastward, full stop, without mentioning the countries. And Finns said that this is not the way it should go. And if before the consensus was that we are not denying a possibility of one day applying for NATO membership if circumstances change, now we don't see the need to do so. And it's in December that that train started moving. And quickly, and the number of supporters rose from 22 to 40 in January and 50 in February, and it was already close to 60 before the invasion of Ukraine started. And then it became unstoppable.
Thank you. So next, I'm going to want to talk about the sort of the reaction to the invasion itself. Maybe start with you, Ambassador Löjdquist. How would you describe the public's reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine? I mean, in a number of countries, obviously Bulgaria, but also Germany, there have been, divisions in the elite, and I imagine, there were some concerns about sort of Russia's behavior. I mean, how would you describe, Sweden's, public reaction to the invasion?
I think there was a great sense of unity in Swedish public and also among all the political parties, and also strongly based, partly on what Arkady mentioned about Finland, about these, Russian treaty proposals that came out mid-December, that essentially on paper would sort of redraw the whole European security order, would be redrawn, renegotiated. But also in Sweden, there was also a strong sense of the importance of international law and what we would call the European security order, which would be based on the principles and commitments of the Helsinki Final Act and the Paris Charter. And these were sort of these principles, normative ideal, were very important. They were not only a moral luxury, but there was sort of hard security policy interests of Sweden that this international law could be upheld. So already 2014, there was a very strong condemnation, and Sweden has been pushing for holding Russia accountable in terms of sanction, legally, politically, diplomatically accountable, and so forth. So I don't think there was, I think, in that sense, and also the report, the white paper on the changed security policy landscape that I was attached to the secretariat for, which was published on May 13, all political parties of the Swedish parliament share the same conclusion and the same assessment of the threat of Russia and the nature of the threat. And I think in that sense, probably Finland, Sweden, the Baltic states, Poland are quite unique and outstanding, and that makes us different from many other countries, because there is no real political split. The question is then what to do about it. And earlier, sorry,
there's no political what? Can you?
There was a great political consensus, but the change was then, what to do about it. And until February, March, it was still sort of military non-alignment that was the way forward, and that changed. And I think it changed a little bit later than in Finland. Finland was ahead of us into the curve of that. But the Swedish public opinion and the political establishment turned around. And I must underline here that, especially for the governing Social Democratic Party, this was quite an unexpected achievement that, within basically 6 to 8 weeks, change a policy or self-understanding of neutrality, military non-alignment, which has been part of the sort of ideological superstructure and the identity of Sweden. And I think there's a difference, in Finland, which has had a much more pragmatic view on this. So I don't see any splits within, like in other countries on the nature of threat. And I think everyone in Sweden agrees that this is not this is not a Ukraine crisis. This is a Russia crisis. And as this white paper concluded, the Russia crisis is systemic, structural, and long-term. This is not only about Ukraine, it's about the whole European security order. It's not only Putin who is the problem now, it's an antagonistic, aggressive Russia. So I said, I think we were prepared, and there has always been a sense of the nature of threat coming from the East and from Russia and Sweden.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to turn it to you, Volodya. Can you just describe sort of Russia's kind of historical position relative to, obviously there's enormous amount to talk about with both Sweden and Finland, but maybe you could just summarize it, hundreds of years of history in 2 minutes, if you can.
Well, I'll try. First, I would say that Russia's position toward Finland, and I believe toward Sweden as well, but I probably know more about Finland, is somewhat ambivalent from the experience of the Russian Empire, from the experience of the Soviet Union, and even nowadays. And it's a little bit of combination of envy to Finland, and also some perceptions of Finnish inferiority in virtually everything, with one major exception, which is ice hockey. In ice hockey, Finland is a world superpower. But as Arkady referred to early Finnish literature, I would refer to an excellent essay on Finland written by a Russian writer, Alexander Kuprin, and he described this perception on Finland through a portrait of 2 Russian merchants who were surprised that Finns offered them a buffet lunch and did everything in a good quality, and not cheat them and offered some sort of cheap price. And a merchant was proud that he spit into a bowl of soup prepared by Finns. This is exactly a perception of Finland among Russians for a long period of time. And if you will have a look on most recent surveys of Russians about their perceptions of Finland, you will find that, well, Russians are very much positive about Finland, but at the same time they perceive Finland as a sort of great tourist destination, and do not consider Finns as equal to them. I will not go into details, but this may be a good explanation of how this Finlandization, correctly portrayed by Arkady, is perceived in the Soviet Union and then in Russia. For Soviets and Russians, this is a sort of a role model how Russia's relationships with other European nations should be organized. Basically, it is a perception that Russia should be an external veto player, and could pose certain limits to European actions, both domestic and international. And it also may be a good explanation of why Russia was so unprepared for quick turnaround of Finnish and Swedish elites and public opinion toward NATO membership. Nobody expected so. Arkady correctly pointed out that for many years there was a minority of Finns ready to join NATO. Nobody took it seriously. And when Putin designed his infamous speech about Ukraine as a creature of Lenin and an artificial construct, this was basically a description of Finland. Most probably, Putin's speechwriters not had in mind Finland as a target. It was, I believe, quite unintentional, but certainly it heavily resonated with misperceptions of Finland from the Russian side. And this also fueled this shift of Finnish public opinion and behavior of elites. And I think that given this unpreparedness for Finland's and Sweden's shift, this may be an explanation of why the response of Russia was relatively mild. Of course, the key reason for that is what's going on in Ukraine and what's on the battlefield. Definitely for Russian authorities, this is a top priority, and Northern Europe is certainly not the top priority. But at the same time, it tells us more about Russia's foreign policy in general and misunderstanding of issues in other parts of the world, including but not limited to Northern Europe. So my point is that there is a great deal of misperceptions of Russia about Finland, and I believe about Sweden as well. And this is both good and bad news. The good news that it was not able to pose any limits to choice of Finns and Swedes. But the bad news that there is a sense of being somehow offended, and this may cause many tensions for the future.
Yeah, can you talk about? I mean, I'm struck by your statement that they were surprised by the shift in Swedish and Finnish attitudes. I mean, in that I've met that shock as well. My friends from Moscow were also, some of them, shocked by the fact that Russia's invasion increased support for NATO in Ukraine. I mean, to any person who has like a modicum of understanding of psychology, this would be sort of utterly obvious and predictable. And so I just feel like, can you explain the kind of, for lack of a better term, the Russian psychology behind this? Like, how would you not expect this kind of reaction when you so blatantly violate international norms? I mean, of course there's going to be an increased support for NATO in Ukraine and Nordic countries and elsewhere. Can you explain it for us?
Well, I guess that there is a denial of agency. Russian propaganda tend to portray Europeans as some sort of puppets of Americans. And it would be misleading to consider that Germans or French, or in this case Finns or Swedes, are just puppets. And okay, if you consider whatever other country as a puppet, you may not pay attention to its internal dynamics and approaches. It doesn't make any sense. And as Russians, I believe in the Foreign Ministry, Security Council, elsewhere, just consider United States as the only partner. And it's not actually a particular case of Putin. One may recall that even Yeltsin offered a deal to Bill Clinton and argued that, well, okay, please give me control over Europe in the 1990s. So there is no wonder that the logic of behavior of particular European countries, especially of Finland and Sweden, who consider it to be not that much important in the eyes of Russia, simply was underestimated.
Interesting. Okay, I'll go to you, Arkady. So obviously, Finland has a intense history with Russia. It's also, my understanding, has been sort of heavily dependent on Russian energy. I mean, what was the reaction to the invasion of February 2024? Was there, as in Sweden, a kind of unified reaction of condemnation, but also was there sort of fear? An interesting parallel is potentially Georgia, and one of the interesting things about Georgia was that there was obviously enormous amount of sympathy towards Ukraine for obvious reasons because of the 2008 invasion in Georgia, but also there was a fear of Russia, which actually sort of generated splits within the Georgian elite. I mean, was there anything like that in Finland, or was there just kind of unified response?
There was a unified response, and this is very interesting because indeed there is a question of threat and threat perception. And it's just as much as Russians believe, don't understand Finland's choice because they think that NATO membership actually increases the threat. That's what they believe in Russia. In Finland, it's different. But now 84% of Finns believe that Russia is a threat. And that's a new thing. 84%, that's a majority that you cannot find in favor of any other question. 74% believe that Russia is an unreliable partner, even in the business sense. So there is a universal response to what has changed, and almost a consensus view that the situation changed to an extent that Finland needs to take these kind of actions, joining NATO. Talking about Ukraine specifically, because of this deeply rooted sense of solidarity and sympathy towards Ukrainians, and which is less important but still not negligible, actually a fairly good knowledge of what modern Ukraine is, in particular Kiev, among a large part of the Ukrainian population. There was no question where to be in this conflict. But it's interesting, as I said, I mean, a lot of Finns have actually been traveling to Ukraine in recent years. There were daily flight connections, visa-free regime, inexpensive accommodation, and all sorts of scenes that you could enjoy in Kiev and other Ukrainian cities. So actually the number of Finns which actually have or had their own first-hand experience with Ukraine, and that experience was positive, is significant, and that matters as well. So solidarity, yes. Interest towards going on, it's still, I would say, because I occasionally follow German press, even British press. I'm in touch with a close colleague who lives in the Netherlands. I mean, Ukraine has gone from the front pages of their newspapers already 2 months ago. So if you want to find the information, you will find it, but it's not what drives the markets. In Finland, it's completely different. All major leading media outlets still devote a lion's share of their front pages to what's going on in Ukraine. And Finnish newspapers, at least several of them, started to translate some of their own articles into Russian and one even into Ukrainian. And that created an effect that these pages are now blocked in Russia. These newspapers are blocked in Russia because they publish content in Russian. The question about military assistance as such is a little bit more tricky because Finland didn't have much to give, but what it could give, it gave fairly quickly. Well, compared to countries like Germany, whose policy is shameful, I would say. Finland did what it could do fairly quickly. And now we're getting to a final point in which is most important. You made a kind of a mistake when you said that Finland was energy dependent on Russia. Actually, no. Yes, Finland was buying 100% of its gas in Russia, but the share of gas in the Finnish energy basket was fairly negligible. It used to be 15% about 20 years ago. It was 7 last year. It was 5 in the beginning of this year. And the Finnish state, and both the state and the business, they took decisions of principle to get rid of this dependency very quickly. So Finland is not buying electricity in Russia anymore. Finland decided to comply with the decision of the European Union, according to which the European companies should not follow the Putin proposed scheme and continue paying in euros. And it refused to pay in rubles. So it was cut from the Russian gas deliveries. Strategically, it doesn't mean much, but for some enterprises, it does mean something. And the government was very open to the people before it happened, saying that some of these enterprises might be closed forever if in next winter. Now Finland is getting the gas from the gas storages in Latvia because there is a Baltic interconnector. And for the next winter, Finland and Estonia jointly will rent basically a tanker with liquefied gas, which should serve the needs of these two countries if the gas is actually found. But still, these decisions were taken. Another decision that was taken was to break the deal with the Rosatom. So there will be no more construction of the new nuclear power plant by the Russians in Finland, even though in the end Finland might have to go to a court and even pay something. But most importantly, Finnish companies started leaving Russia. Not immediately, not overnight. Some waited for some time. But by now, the process is unstoppable and irreversible. Some make a better deal when leaving. They're able to sell bits and pieces of their business. Some are just leaving. And that also that concerns as well the Finnish energy champions. So for Finland, the economic impact of breaking the economic ties with Russia that are now witnessed will not be insignificant. It will be something that people might notice. But there is no even a debate in the country whether it is or isn't worth doing so. The peace matters. Life on the continent where aggressive wars do not happen matters. And the thinking that it's no point to have a prosperous economy if you cannot defend this economy actually dominates.
So can you just describe, this is very interesting. First of all, when did the Finns decide to stop buying electricity from Russia? And how would you describe the overall economic impact of the sanctions on Finland, since we would expect that to be fairly high given its geographic.
Well, I guess Finns took the decision at some time in April. I mean, I cannot give you more precise.
Okay.
It's all recent. It's again. I was saying before, there was the thinking before that the conflict is not inevitable, and for as long as it was not inevitable, of course, they were preparing for emergencies, but no decisions were even discussed. But when the invasion started, it became more or less clear that this is what you have to do. So also Finns decreased the purchase of Russian oil enormously. So when and they were in favor of the sanctions. For them, it's not a problem to get rid of the purchase of the Russian oil. If I'm not mistaken, I might be slightly mistaken. April data was already like 4 times less than March, and it's probably 8 times less Russian oil purchase than in January. I'm talking money. I'm not talking physical volumes because the price has been changing. The electricity, it's not a big deal because, of course, they were buying electricity in Russia because it was cheaper, but not because it was like that necessary. In the north, there's basically a surplus of electricity. It costs. My electricity bill starting of May this year has grown by 25%. But overall, electricity prices in Finland are fairly low compared by European standards. The same refers to coal. I mean, Finland was still buying some coal. I think it might still be importing a little bit according to the old contracts, but new contracts are not being concluded about that. So basically, Finland will get rid of whatever energy dependency on Russia it might have had within the next several months. I'm not sure that I can estimate the direct economic impact of just this measure, because also the trade ties are being broken and are being severe. You can talk about between maybe 0.5% to 1% of GDP this year. It's not the end of days, but it's something which matters for the Finnish economy, which has been demonstrated slugging growth before COVID and would definitely love to grow more than it actually will. It will be affected more than some other European countries. But again, as I said, there is no debate that these decisions need to be revised.
That's interesting because I mean, I would have expected a little bit greater impact given Finland's size and proximity to Russia. That's quite fascinating.
But I mean, trade. I mean, this in the Soviet days, the Soviet Union was the destination of 25% of the Finnish exports, or 25% of trade overall. But already 10 years ago, we would be talking about maybe 7 to 9. And it fell further in the last decade because of the crisis, because of the understanding that the Russian markets is not a promised land really for Finland, and you need to reorient your trade towards more Europe, Sweden, Germany in particular. But it was a logical process. It's not the process that is starting; it's the process that is actually being finished at the moment.
Interesting. So I'm going to turn to you, Ambassador Löjdquist. First of all, kind of responding to Arkady's mention that sort of in contrast to Germany, Russia is still very much in the news. I mean, in Finland, I mean, is this the case in Sweden? And also, can you just talk a little bit about the decision to actually join NATO and sort of, what motivated that decision? Is this symbolic, or is this, or is it actual fear of Russian invasion?
Well, I think, starting with the first question, I think yes, Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the war is still very much present in media and in sort of the public discourse, and there are also various symbolic manifestations. Like in Helsinki, we just recently had a visit of a US amphibious carrier, Kersich, which was very visibly right in the central Stockholm harbor, and a number of other international ships, which are now since Sunday participating in this NATO exercise, Boltops in the Baltic Sea. So yeah, no, this is a big deal, and it's very much discussed, definitely. On the motivations, I mean, clearly, already 2015, the government then stated that an armed aggression against Sweden from Russia could not be excluded. It doesn't mean that it was likely or anything like that, but that has been sort of part of the discourse, and that started already 2013, before Russia's aggression against Ukraine, because there was some Russian military exercises and airplanes flying in a way at Easter 2013 that got a lot of attention in Swedish media and Swedish discussion, and whether Sweden was prepared for this or not, and that started intensive discussion on Swedish defense policy. However, so I think there's a combination of factors, and not only Russia's violations of international law and European security order, but also the way it fought this war in Ukraine. There has also been, for the last 7, 8, 9 years, sort of more among specialists, but a military strategic discussion on if Russia would move on the Baltic states, say, such an attack would maybe start with Russia occupying the Swedish island of Gotland, centrally placed in the Baltic Sea, because it could then establish sort of A2AD, anti-access area denial, by placing missiles on the island of Gotland. So even if Sweden wasn't directly threatened, just because of our geographical location, and for NATO being able, for the US to be able to support the Baltic states, you know, you would have to cross Swedish airspace. You would need to access on the Baltic Sea. So this has been discussed. If you look for you know, maybe the last motivating driving factor that was decisive, not sufficient but necessary, was the understanding that Finland would join NATO, preferably with Sweden, but that Finland was prepared to join NATO also without Sweden, and that, I think, was the sort of final push for the Swedish NATO membership bid.
Thanks. So just a follow-up question to both you and Arkady, and then I'll get to you, Volodya. So, you know, obviously, you know, so actually, maybe I'll start with you, Volodya. So can you just describe, you know, characterize Russia's reaction to the NATO decision? I mean, obviously they came out with certain threats, but don't seem to have done anything. I mean, is this, you know, you mentioned that sort of part of the reason it surprised me. Is there anything that Russia kind of in its basket of tools that it could do, or is it just simply kind of there's basically literally nothing it could do?
Yeah, as I noted, this quick shift of Finnish and Swedish position was quite a surprise for Russian leadership. And there were two streams of response. One was the position which was promoted by some hawks and persons who were probably not previously known as hawks, like the former Prime Minister Medvedev, who well, expressed their anger in terms of some nasty words. But the position of Putin and his more close entourage were, well, I would say, more moderate, and they argued that, well, if Finland and Sweden just join NATO, it will not add major threats to Russian security. But if US arms and US-led military bases will be deployed to Finland and Sweden, then Russia will respond. And in a way, it's a continuity of the same logic of perceptions that there is no such thing like agency of Finland and Sweden, and they perceived as more or less puppets in the hands of Americans. But my understanding is that both responses are just well, immediate reactions, and my understanding is that Russia definitely feels itself offended, but at the moment have no more strong means of response. And I do believe that everything will be decided in the battlefields in Ukraine. If at certain point Russia will be able to reach its goals in the battlefield in Ukraine, then well, definitely there will be a feeling of need for revenge toward Nordic countries, but we can't predict what will happen in the battlefield.
Okay, so I have another question, which is, so Russia's sort of seemingly non-reaction to Finland's decision to join NATO, to many, including I'll be honest myself, kind of speaks to the fact that NATO was really never part of the motivation for the invasion. It was always about Ukraine and sort of, to a certain extent, about great Russian nationalism. I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, it just, I mean, it's quite striking given the fact that Finland, borders obviously Russia, and as Arkady mentioned, it is well armed, and you would think, I mean, if this whole conflict were really about NATO, then Russia would be quite concerned by Finland's decision to join. I mean, would you join NATO? Would you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely. For Russia's leadership, Ukraine is a problem, not NATO. And this is why Ukraine became a target, and definitely, well, whatever hypothetical possibilities of Ukrainians joining NATO was just a smoke screen. No, Russia denied the very existence of Ukraine, and that's it. And this is a sharp contrast. Russia may be very kind of misleading in terms of perceptions of Finland, but Russia did not deny the existence of Finland, and this was a result of Finnish resistance during the Winter War of 1939. This is why there is no way for denial. For Ukraine, it's very much different. Yeah, I agree.
Right. Okay, so one of the participants raised the very important question of Turkey, and Turkey's so far opposition to Finland and Sweden's expansion to NATO. Can either of you, Arkady or Professor Löjdquist, speak to this at all? Maybe start with you, Ambassador.
Yes. Well, as you know, then, I mean, Turkey now has raised objections and is not willing in NATO to greet Sweden and Finland welcome to NATO and give our countries invitee status. And this is at least partly then based on the perception in Turkey that the relationship between more Sweden than Finland, I assume, with Kurdish organizations and support to the Syrian Defense Forces and so forth. It also has some domestic aspects of sort of a Kurdish caucus in the Swedish Parliament and so forth. This was not. This is very unfortunate. I don't think that the political establishment had fully expected this and was prepared for this. And I think this is a subject for real concern now. But we also know that Erdogan, that there are many other factors influencing Erdogan's behavior, including the domestic situation in Turkey in upcoming elections. And they also have quite difficult relationship to Greece, and there's a long history of Turkish-US relationship, which have seen better days and so forth. So we will have to see how this develops, but of course, not by any intention, as I can see it, but of course this places Russia's in Russia's hands, so to say, and this uncertainty now and delay of the Swedish and Finnish NATO membership.
Thanks. So I have a question next about diplomacy. There was recently an article in the New York Times, interviews of sort of Ukrainian officials in Eastern Ukraine who previously considered pro-Russian politicians. And one of the things that came out of this is in places like Kryvyi Rih and then others, that Russia basically made zero effort to actually kind of engage and solicit diplomatically the support of these officials, who would obviously be important in the invasion, which is quite striking, that Russia just kind of assumed that these places would go along. And I'm curious, in the case of Finland and Sweden, was there any sort of real diplomatic effort to sort of dissuade Finland or Sweden from joining NATO? I mean, or is it simply, is there anything that we haven't heard in the press or anything? So Arkady, maybe I'll start with you. Just was there any kind of diplomatic effort to dissuade Finland?
Well, there was, and it's actually been going on for decades. I mean, I remember a visit of the then head of the general staff of the Russian Federation, General Makarov, to Finland. That was probably 10 years ago. Putin coming to Finland a couple of times because they had this meeting so twice a year with the Finnish President Niinistö, one here and one in Russia. For years, he was trying to dissuade Finland or explain to Finland how much it was going to lose in case such a decision were to be taken. So, but most recently, I'd say that it was more about threats than about enticements and incentives. And of course, this is something which does not really work well with the Finns, especially because Finns are kind of cold-blooded people who are not easy to threaten or to make. They never panic. I mean, they, of course, the reasonable people, they understand when there is a threat, but they also understand that there is a border of this 1,300 kilometers. You cannot put a military base on every square kilometer along that border. There are expectations, not just, let's say, fears, that there would be intensification of the hybrid warfare. There might be violations of especially the airspace. There might be some other difficult issues. Maybe a new migrant crisis can be arranged the way it was arranged in 2015 on the Finnish-Russian border. But there's no feeling that, again, Russia will attack. It was interesting in April when, especially in Ukrainian media, there was this story that, kind of Russian troops are maneuvering near Vyborg, so Finns should get worried. And the Finnish military authorities basically said, we're not worried. These are the exercises that we knew were going to happen, full stop. So there was a statement of 2 sentences and the whole nation calmed down back again. So I don't know if it answers your question, but I mean, basically, there wasn't much of a diplomatic effort, and it's not that easy to just scare people. As Volodya said, there was no realization how serious Finland and Sweden were going to become and how quickly this was going to happen. And when it happened, and Moscow actually found itself presented with a fait accompli, it didn't have much to do because it had its hands tied in Ukraine.
Right. It is remarkable just the sort of almost exclusive reliance on sort of threats, which are clearly ineffective. I mean, can you describe the sort of efforts in Sweden, Professor Löjdquist? I mean, was there?
I think, I'm not professor.
I'm
yet.
sorry, Ambassador.
I'm not likely to be in a career path leading to professorship anytime soon. But I think there has been repeatedly over the last 5-10 years, or at least 2015, 16, and so forth. There has been some territorial Russian airplanes violating the Swedish airspace. There was one such incident just a couple of months ago with 4 aircrafts shortly entering the Swedish airspace at Gotland, when, interestingly enough, the Swedish and Finnish defense ministers were visiting the island. So there has been this kind of security policy, military signaling posture. There has been repeatedly also mentioned that, and that is of course a form of scare that, and by the Swedish ambassador, the Russian ambassador in Stockholm, but also by Russian diplomats in Moscow, that that Sweden, if Sweden and Finland would join NATO, that would be met with sort of military political measures. And there were sort of these allusions that we would have to target nuclear weapons if there were sort of NATO infrastructure in Swedish territory. We would have to target nuclear weapons against Swedish targets and so forth. So that's part of the scare. However, I would slightly modify, but it has been fairly low key. And I think, I don't know what the instructions from Moscow to the Russian ambassador in Stockholm is, but I would assume that until now, sort of the key priority was, to keep Sweden outside of NATO. And as Arkady said, SCEEUS doesn't necessarily work. So I think they have been, yes, there has been these allusions to SCEEUS and so forth, but it has been fairly moderate and toned down. And there was no, if you looked at public opinion or the political parties, there was no sense that this was something that is going to happen quickly and soon, and it changed very rapidly over the last 6 months and so forth. But I don't see that there was sort of an intensified diplomatic effort over the last couple of months. I've seen no signs of that.
So no efforts as enticements or nothing on that front, or?
What could they possibly, offer in terms of incitement? I don't see what the carrots could be.
I mean, well, cheap energy. That's always.
We import
right.
Absolutely no gas. I mean,
Right.
we're not at all dependent on Russian energy.
Right, absolutely. Okay, thanks. So just maybe we'll wrap it up with one final question from the Voice of America. You spoke about this, Ambassador Löjdquist, initially a bit about Gotland, but she says, if we talk about potential military aggression of Russia against Finland and Sweden, is there an analysis in Helsinki and Stockholm of how such aggression could unfold? If not military aggression, then what practical measures do Finland and Sweden expect from Russia in response to the accession of NATO? I mean, you partly answered that question, both of you, but if you could just maybe expand on your answer there, sort of concretely. You mentioned Gotland. We'll start with you, Ambassador. You mentioned Gotland. I mean, can you sort of expand on sort of what the expectations would be there?
I mean, first of all, I mean, I don't think that we see, any increased risks of military aggression against Sweden because of our intention to join NATO. So that's a separate question. And if you look at the map, I mean, Sweden and Finland obviously have different geographies. I mean, Finland has a border of more than 1,300 kilometers, a land border in scarcely populated areas. And I mean, in Sweden, you would either have to go through northern Finland to reach Sweden, or you come by ship or by airplane. And this is also reflected in the various different structures of our defense forces, where Sweden puts a lot of emphasis on airplanes and submarines, just to make sure that that they don't reach land, so to say. And I think, and that has been sort of the scenarios would be sort of a quick move, for instance, on Gotland with airborne troops, airplanes, and oversea. And in combination with hybrid threats, to create a sort of what you would call a sort of gray zone scenario. You don't know really, to create uncertainty, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and various forms of hybrid threats. So I think that's what we've been looking on. But again, the geography is very different between and perhaps we have been more looking at Kaliningrad than mainland Russia. So there's a clear difference between Sweden and Finland here.
So Arkady, can you speak to this? Obviously, this is a huge topic. I'm sure there are many war games, that have been going on in Finland for decades. But maybe you could just give a kind of brief summary of sort of the kind of most likely worst case scenario, militarily for Finland.
I'm not a military professional, and I actually don't like this type of exercises, because when the basic understanding is that the invasion is not likely, it probably doesn't make that much sense to go and discuss, okay, in which part it's slightly more likely than in the others. I will only mention one interesting case, or not as a probability, but as a case. And it's, again, I'm talking about the Åland Islands. It's an archipelago between Finland and Sweden, and it has a demilitarized status for a reason that has nothing to do with Russia or even the Soviet Union, because it's been demilitarized for 100 years. And in principle, if you read social media, if you talk to people, there is some willingness among the Finnish population to end up that status. And the countries involved into the convention, or whatever the treaty was, Fredrik knows better, I mean, they probably would have nothing against ending that status, but people living in the Åland Islands are not that eager to put an end to that status, so they would probably continue be demilitarized, half jokingly, because that means that the boys living there are not drafted to the Finnish army as recruits at the moment. But I mean, if perhaps if somebody in Russia would think about doing something of that kind of stuff, that would be one place to start thinking about. But again, I repeat, nobody expects an aggression, especially after or if the NATO membership becomes a reality, because it happens so that Russia attacks countries which are not NATO members.
Okay, right, of course. So just maybe a question for you, Volodya, that's come up here is that, I'm not sure if public opinion still matters in Russia at all or not, or whether Russia's become so closed that it's not an issue anymore. But one might think that, that part of Putin's popular support is rooted in the sort of great power status, and Putin himself has sort of set out the sort of, at least rhetorically, the sort of reduction of NATO power as part of his raison d'etre, at least in the public sense. So I mean, has the expansion of NATO to Finland and Sweden, would that affect people's attitudes towards Putin at all, or what do you think?
I doubt that potential joining of Finland and Sweden to NATO will matter for the Russian public opinion. First, it's a relatively minor issue vis-a-vis what's going on in Ukraine. Second, all public opinion about foreign policy, I mean, not only in Russia, elsewhere at the globe, is mostly framed by the media. And as long as the Kremlin keep control over major media channels and use these channels as instruments of political manipulations, I doubt that these issues will make any impact. But regarding to the broader issue, to what extent public opinion matters, I think it's some sort of effect of a mirror image. And Kremlin definitely would like to get more public support using these mechanisms of persuasion, and in this respect, public opinion is very much important, and huge efforts invested into keeping approval rate very high. But definitely, Finland and Sweden not that much important for Russian public opinion.
Okay. Great. Well, we're going to end it there. Thank you, Professor Vladimir Gelman, Professor Arkady Moshes, and you should be a professor, Ambassador Löjdquist. I seems you have a very professorial tone, and I mean that as a compliment. But thank you all very much, and thank you for a good discussion. We will continue our discussions on Friday. Very related. We're going to have a discussion about Ukraine's security and potential for NATO membership. So please stay tuned, come back and join us on Friday. And I thank you all for joining us, and Slava Ukraini.